Okay, good afternoon. I'm Sára Varsa from Greater Good Charities. I'm the Vice President of Pet Programs, and today we're going to be talking about disaster preparedness. We are doing this with the support and facilitation of our friends at Boehringer Ingelheim, and we are so appreciative that they have had us here today to speak with you. So, I'm going to do my first thing. I want to say we are co-presenting this with Charleston Animal Society, and I get the great honor and pleasure of co-presenting with a former colleague, who is Bryant Taylor, who is our Emergency Preparedness and Response Manager for Charleston Animal Society. I've told him to stay close, and if he wants to interject, to jump in, he will have to have the microphone. But this is a local resource within the state of South Carolina that is working on emergency preparedness and response. And so we have a lot of cross-content, but I want to make sure you know that he is here as A, resource, and B, to chime in. I've told him chime in if there's something that I'm missing, and he said he didn't want to come up here with me. So I'm going to ask first by a show of hands, right? So we're just going to do the raise hand thing, if you guys are game. And I'm going to give your shoulder a workout. You're welcome. There's going to be a lot of strong situation here. How many of you have a personal preparedness plan for your own pets in the event of a disaster? Okay, 3. So we're starting off, we got a lot to cover. This could be its own series. We could be here for 2 days talking about preparedness. We're going to abbreviate this in about 40 minutes. After that question, the first thing I'm going to say is, if you are not personally prepared to handle a disaster, you are not prepared to serve your community or your shelter animals, period. If you do not have a personal preparedness plan, given your function for your community as an animal welfare professional, you are not prepared to help your community. So we're going to start there. That's going to be number 1. How many of your organizations have disaster plans? Raise your hand, please. Okay. Like, just be very open about it. Like, yes, we have preparedness plans. How many of you, keep your hands up, know what that plan is? Okay? How many of you think that everybody on your staff, to include your foster volunteers, know what that plan is? Okay. So this should be fantastic, this conversation that we have today. Just some key pearls. I'm going to, once again, keep to the thread, start small. Writing a disaster plan is extremely daunting from a facility perspective. So when I say start small, you're going to start at home, okay? I want to make sure that in the time we have together, this is functional. So I'm going to cover the content on the slides, but I'm going to stress a couple key points. One of those points I'm going to stress again, which I've now done 3 times in 30 seconds, is you need a personal preparedness plan. How many of you were in animal welfare during Hurricane Katrina? Hurricane Katrina. How many of you were in animal welfare? Okay. How many of your facilities have been impacted by disaster? Raise your hand. Okay. Who would like to answer the question? What is the greatest threat to an animal shelter facility in terms of disaster? What is the most common type of disaster? Don't all jump at me at once. I'm very patient.
Flooding.
What's it? What did you say?
Flooding.
Okay.
In our area.
So flooding is an answer. What is the most common type of disaster? Okay, hold on. I'm going to run over here. Samantha?
Tornadoes?
Okay, so tornadoes. We're talking about larger natural disasters now. Okay. I'm going over here. Excellent. Yes?
Might be a different kind of disaster, but overcrowding.
Okay, overcrowding. Sure, that truly is a disaster. In the context of this, for natural disaster, straight up, you had your own disaster and having to move back. The most common type of disaster is facility impact not related to natural disaster. It is a facility fire. It is loss of power, okay? Either heating or cooling. Those are the 2 most common disasters that can happen at any point unrelated to a natural disaster and a catastrophic event that could impact your animal welfare, right? Can take you out. So we are going to cover, which we have a little bit, what the definition of disaster is, the hierarchy of response with emergency management within the first 7 to 10 days. I want to share with you from an emergency manager's perspective, what they are thinking about for their community when there is a catastrophic event, okay? And then the 4 steps to preparedness, social media considerations. Like I said, this could be a course, within a bagel, within a course. So we are going to cover the main points, all right? So a definition of disaster is a sudden and terrible event in nature that can result in loss of life, limb, property. We just talked about what those most common disasters are. A disaster definition is relative to you. Do you understand what I'm saying by that? Your disaster definition for your facility could be, I have 150 animals in my shelter, and I just got a hurricane warning, and I am in a flood zone, and that is going to be my disaster. You could not be in an area that's geographically impacted, and a disaster for you is potentially not related to a huge event, but it's freezing of pipes, right? Your scope, your definition of disaster is going to be different depending on where you're sitting. So when we think of disaster, we often think it's going to be this big thing, right? It's going to be this big thing, and it's going to be multi-jurisdictional. That's not always the case. It could be very small in scope, and it's what overwhelms you. It's what taxes your resources. So a disaster, you guys could have the individuals who are 2 hours away from each other. You could suffer from the same event, and one shelter is having a disaster, and the other shelter is not, okay? Because it's overwhelming the resources and the capacity. So there's facility impact, community disruption, state, and federal. When you start to have a state and federally declared disaster, there are going to be resources that come your way that may not have been available in a facility impact situation, which is why I want to rewind and have you raise your hands again. How many of you know your facility's disaster plan? 2, 3 people. Do you know what's going to happen if you have a facility disaster? Your event is going to mushroom. This one situation that was a crisis is now going to become an unsustainable crisis, okay? So preparedness starts with you, right? So if I'm an ED, if I'm an animal welfare professional, if I'm a foster volunteer manager in my shelter, and I am bracing for an event that is predictable, right? Because there are different types of natural disasters. If I can't personally take care of my pets and my family to be available, I don't have the foundation for a disaster plan for my facility, okay? So what is happening in the brain of an emergency manager who's just dealt with what they are defining as a catastrophic disaster, and they have to respond, all right? This is an internal created hierarchy. This is just something from experience. It's not something that's published or necessarily put out. But your emergency managers are going to do one thing first. They're going to prioritize human need, okay? What we have learned from Hurricane Katrina and what we see so often now, which is an incredible function of that movement, is that many emergency managers and first responders understand that taking care of people means taking care of their pets, right? They do understand that. What they may not have is resource. What they may not have is a relationship with you to know that there is a resource for people and their pets. Also, many NGOs, for example, the Red Cross, it's chapter specific, so they can come into a region. They do not have to accept pets into their shelters. It is by chapter. So they're going to come to the first animal welfare organization in that region and say, how can you help us? We have X amount of people in our shelter. They're all stating they have pets at home or have pets in need. We need you to be their resource for them, okay? So they're prioritizing people. They're going to prioritize search and rescue if that's a need. And they're going to maybe make notes and indicate where animals are involved. But what they're going to do for non-ambulatory or at-risk populations is extract them from immediate danger and get them out of the way of other first responders so that those first responders can come in and do their jobs. And again, their jobs are to do what? take care of the people, okay? What you don't want to do is be a person in that system that needs their help. If you can get out, if it's a predictable disaster, you want to put yourself in a position where you have relied on family members, you have moved your animals, and you are available as a resource and an expert in the field. Because what emergency managers are not is animal welfare professionals. All right? Then they're going to be looking, as I said, people, service animals with their people. Next in that infrastructure is going to be companion animals in homes, shelters, and pocket pets. After that is going to be the larger herd stock and hoof stock, right? It's going to be equine, farm animals, exotic animals, and it's also going to be how they're defined in your code. So equine all over the country go over 2 different buckets. Those buckets are either they're identified as a companion animal or they're identified as livestock. Their access to provisions for support can vary geographically depending on how they're defined, okay? And then it's going to be wildlife. Oftentimes we will say, well, there are appropriate wildlife centers, but wildlife is not going to necessarily be on that hierarchy of response for emergency managers. So you're thinking about the welfare of your shelter pets, your own pets, and what your community's needs are going to be. Demographically, you know the population that you're serving. If you have overpopulation during the summer, and you are in an area that is prone to hurricanes and tornadoes, you know what's going to happen to your shelter population when an event hits? Right? So what does personal preparedness look like? Let's start there. Once again, you need to be able to get your animals out safely for a 5 to 7 day period, initially is what I would say. You want to make sure you have medications, photographs on your phone of your pets in case identification becomes an issue, right? Or microchip them, obviously. I'm sure we guys have all heard the microchip lesson. So that's right. Okay. 5 to 7 days, food, water, any special diet, any medical provisions. If you are in a facility that has your veterinary community, if your facility is impacted by a natural disaster, what also may be affected? Veterinary office. It's not going to be open, can't give you medications, can't verify your records, so make sure you have all that stuff. Have a plan if you are not at home, and have a plan if you are at home. So a plan when you're not at home is my neighbor has a key, it's a trusted family friend, I have my to-go bags. Who remembers the whole conversation on to-go bags or to-go kits? Anyone? Okay, I'll send some information. But basically, for every animal you need to have safe containment to be able to get out. So 1-to-1 ratio, right? For your cats, preferably speaking, you're doing a big airline carrier that has a litter box in it so that their home that they evacuate in is all freestanding. The thing that you don't want to do with a small cat while you guys are evacuating and their environment is going to change is have to open it up and have that cat get out somewhere until you've gotten it acclimated. It is for a temporary time and you can make it comfortable, but you want them to be able to eat and eliminate in a contained space, okay? Or they're going to get lost. Wire crates are not acceptable. They will find a way out. I don't know if you know that cats are also ninjas. So make sure the carrier is secure, right? And ensure there's living provision within that carrier. For your dogs, if you don't typically have a martingale collar on or a harness on, may I strongly encourage you to have that be part of your to-go kit. For as disoriented and upset as you may feel during a disaster, think about that from your pet's perspective. There's going to be disruption to their natural sights, smells, community, routine. And so some of the behaviors that they may express may not be the behaviors that you say, that's my dog, right? But your dog is going to emote the disruption. So make sure there's a safe way to contain all your animals. Try to get them out of the path of the concern. So we look at disaster 2 different ways. Pre-72 hours an event, post-72 hours an event. And you'll say, Shada, some events you don't know. And that's an excellent point, everyone. You don't. Pre-72 hours is typically your hurricanes, okay? Covers a list, flooding. Especially if you're talking about river flooding or gradual flooding, you have some time. So you can be exercising this plan. Normally we talk about events you can't are not predictable, wildfire, tornado is what happens post 72 hours. What am I doing in the 72 hours post-impact? A lot of the premises are the same. You are personally prepared and removing your animals from crisis. And if you have to remove yourself with your family to be safe, you are thinking about getting yourself out and being able to care for your family, which you need to, right? That's step number one. But if that's going to happen, then what is the plan for your role in your shelter? Who is going to take on that responsibility by function? Because you will not be available. Understandably, if that needs to occur. But what have you done for your pets and what have you done for your personnel to prepare them for the fact that your personal preparedness plan takes you out of the mix? Okay. The other thing to remember about a personal preparedness plan and executing it is even if you cross all your T's and dot all your I's and there's a catastrophic event and you are prepared to help your community, you yourself personally will burn out by 5 to 7 days because you're going to get pulled in a million different directions by your organization and by your community. And so you need to have a sustainable plan where there is some transition in assistance because you will need to take a break. Because if you don't, and you don't practice self-care, who can you not be available to? Who? Yourself, your animals, the shelter animals, your community, right? And it's a big thing to have on your shoulders. The whole community is expecting it. But something we don't do a lot in animal welfare is self-care. And if you're not caring for yourself, if you are not personally prepared, once again, 56th time, you will not be prepared for your community or your shelter. So practice what you preach. Start with a personal preparedness plan. How many of you guys have multiple animals? Raise your hands. It was just a guess. Okay. How many of you have small and large animals? How many of you have containment for every animal you have in your house? So if you have 2 cats, you have 2 carriers. Let me just be very specific. Okay, excellent. How many of you have horses? How many of you, with the one person who has a horse, are practicing trailering every single chance you get? Guess what a horse is not going to do in a disaster? They're not going to be like, oh, thank you. I will get on there. Okay? It's going to be super scary, and they're not going to do it. You got to practice. Got to practice. Got to practice. Do you know where your cats are going to hide when there's a high wind event? From you. Somewhere in your house. Do you know those spaces? Get them in a bathroom. So if you have to go, you can go. I tether my dog to me. I put a harness on, I put a leash on, and it's just like he hates it, and I'm like, I don't care. He's going to go in every house, every room in the house with me until this event is over. I'm going to have him attached, all right? Or where we can shelter in place. So we covered this. I jumped up on myself. But when you're not at home, when you're at home, and when you're responsible for others. So I think we all know that the theme is, who would like to answer the question, what is the theme of disaster preparedness for your shelter? And I have to hand you the mic if you're willing to answer. So raise your hand, please. What is the theme of disaster preparedness? What is the one takeaway today? Because I have failed in my mission if you all don't answer it. Okay, I see you. Yes?
That you need to be prepared first.
Yep. Personal preparedness. That's the one theme. It's the one takeaway. If you don't take anything else away, that is the one takeaway, right? It starts there. Okay, I did my job. I mean, it was one person. I saw 2 people, but I saw you guys mouthing. Okay. So when you have created your disaster plan, communicated it with all your family members know the disaster plan, whether it's a emergency spot meetup, right? What if you're on an evacuation route, so your partner is at work and you are also at work. Do you have an emergency spot to meet up that's not your house, that somebody's coming to bring the pets? All these things need to come into account. Again, what are you doing if you're staying in place? What are you doing if you have to leave? Once you identify those two things, what does that mean for you being able to be there for your shelter and make sure you're covering that too? So I like to think about disaster preparedness in these buckets. Identify your risks, develop a plan, implement and train, be a leader in your community. No plan has any merit if people don't know it. People can't know it if you don't teach it, or talk about it, or have it written down, or have it be part of the training. Disaster preparedness is as essential to onboarding new employees and having them understand as it is that they know how to punch in and out of a clock. What if they are at your facility when a disaster happens? Do they know the tornado room? Do they know that everybody will go to code red? Do they know what code red means? Okay. Where we see this happening over and over again is in our school systems. My daughter comes home every day and says, "Oh, Mom, we did an active shooter drill today," which is really heartwarming. But they're planning for a catastrophic event, and they're communicating to all the stakeholders that are there. Okay? So, identifying risk. We've put our buckets in. There's catastrophic natural disaster risk, right? So what are you disaster prone to in this state of South Carolina? Flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes. And I just want to say flooding again, Horry County, because that is going to happen when gators are in the road. And then Shada doesn't come, because I have other things to do, because I am not doing that. I was like, that's a disaster and a disaster. So there's this catastrophic event component, but what else do we need to think about? Facility impact that is localized to my facility. No, and I'm going to put Zach on the spot, and hey, who from Rescue Rebuild, who's going to be speaking to you guys a little bit later. Knowing what your building is constructed of, rated for, is a totally underrated component of managing a shelter. Are you concrete? Are you brick? Is your chain link there? Do you have hazardous materials? Where are they stored? Are they tied down? Okay. Are your hazardous materials that are flammable in your shelter environment right next to something that could aid and facilitate in their combustion right by an animal care center? Like, do you have your dogs' runs right next to where you put your propane? So you got to look at everything. There's facility impact and there's catastrophic natural disaster impact. Again, the premises for being prepared are the same, but the scope is different. Okay? So you're going to develop a plan. Start small, right? This is daunting. Personal preparedness number 1. Identifying your risk helps you organize your thoughts on how you're going to create your plan. Start small. I'm going to think about facility impact first, whatever it may be, because that's what I want to be prepared for. Loss of power, building damage, okay? These are all things that are going to have the same premises, whether it's a catastrophic natural disaster that's doing it or if it's facility impact. I'm going to look at what spaces in my shelter I think are going to be impacted, and I'm going to create 2 plans. They're pretty similar to personal preparedness. Do you know what they are? Ooh, anyone want to answer? This goes back. Just take a gander. Go ahead. Thank you.
When you're there and when you're not there.
Yep. Sheltering in place and leaving. Right? Just put it in 2 buckets. Make it easy for yourself. All right? Personal preparedness, I'm either here or I'm not here. Facility preparedness, we're either here or we're not here. In an event that is predictable, one of the biggest keys to success we have seen nationally is pre-evacuation of owned shelter pets so that you have reduced the population in your facility. What facilitates that is partnerships now. It's communication now, either with other shelters, with other emergency managers, with transport partners. If you are not having those communications now, it's going to be very difficult for you to have them during a crisis. Make those relationships now. Your stakeholders in this are other members of your animal welfare community and business owners, emergency managers, first responders, okay? Create that coalition now, not when. Chaos will invite chaos. The crisis doesn't have to be a crisis plan, all right? So you're gonna have one that is for your shelter facility if you stay, one that is for your shelter facility if you evacuate. What could something look like if you stay? Could be transitioning animals to one part of your facility that doesn't get as much impact with safe containment, okay? Wherever possible, start thinking about your normalized shelter operations with a disaster plan in place. If your cats are living in catteries and you have an opportunity and it's not a violation of your fire code, make sure there are carriers above each of your little catteries, okay? Because in a disaster, what you're not going to want to do is run, put together crates, zip tie them, get the animal. Because what's going to happen is there is going to be loss of life, or you're going to have to make a decision where you need to choose for your own personal safety in those situations. You want to be prepared. Try to have containment ready for each animal. A lot of times shelters will consolidate equipment in one area, so your leashes and collars are in one place. Try to think about it more as a large animal facility. When you're at a barn, the tack typically for boarding barns or otherwise, and Julie, keep me honest and correct me if I'm wrong, but halters and lead lines are there on the front, right? So when you're going to take your horse out of the stall or you're moving around or you want to get it from the pasture, that's available to you. Is that how your barn works right now? Okay. Think about that for the dogs. Have their leashes and their harnesses there. Somehow think about the design where it's not a dangerous situation for them on a day-to-day management. You can still do it for your staff time, but it's available if you need to have it. Okay? Implement and train. So we've gotten to, I'm personally prepared. Like, you guys are ready, right? You know what to do. You're going to take care of yourselves. You now have created a plan for if you're going to stay or if you're going to go. And then you're going to communicate that plan. And you're going to communicate it to everyone. And I'm going to bring the foster volunteers back. How many of you have had pets in foster when an event has happened for your facility? Raise your hand. How many of you have in your contract or in your relationship with your fosters the expectation that they will evacuate with that animal? Think about that. Could that be a question? Could that be an opportunity so you know that animal is safe and is not coming back into the system when you're trying to deal with stuff? Okay? And then be a leader in your community. And this is going to take time. But again, strong show of hands. Work out the other shoulder if you want to. I didn't get my workout in today, so I'm just like, I'm doing my calisthenics while we're talking. How many of you know your emergency manager in your county? Okay, this should be 100%. Right? By name. You know where all those decisions are going to happen for what happens to your organization? What if your generator goes down and you have no power and it's the middle of the summer? Do you know who's going to help facilitate making sure that the animals are cared for because you've created a partnership that is long-standing and is collegial? Your emergency manager. Because people are going to be coming in to take care of the human need. And if you can say, I need to be on this list within 72 hours, bet you a generator shows up. Emergency lighting. It's one of my favorite things in the world. Anytime I see when you see a convoy that's coming after a hurricane with the power trucks and you can see the ones that have the lights that come up, like that's about like my favorite toy. I'm like, can I have the emergency lighting? I don't even need it. Just want it, right? Coming on the back, own generator, stands up, gives you light. What if you have no power? How can you do your animal care? All right, so make those relationships now. I can also see there's organic things, geographically speaking, where you guys are. Like you have a relationship with each other and are communicating. Just by body language, right? But if you're impacted, so is that partner with you that's in that community. Look at this room right now. Are you guys talking to each other? Do your ordinances allow you guys to talk to each other? Do this now. Hey, I know we're all suffering and animal welfare is a big issue, our staffing is down, but I want to talk about emergency preparedness and response. I'm on an evacuation route. You're 3 hours outside of the disaster zone when an emergency hits. Can we share resources? What do you think this could look like for us? talk to each other. That's how you're a leader. Okay? When you have a personal preparedness plan, if you have a family, is the whole family executing the plan? Yes. Who's your family for your shelter? Everyone in your community. Okay. So I touched on this a little bit when I threw Zach into the mix. But knowing what your facility is comprised of is very underrated. Start to learn that. You don't have to be a building expert. Just know I'm at risk of, right? If I'm all foster-based, I don't have to have a shelter-in-place plan. I do have to have an evacuation plan. And if my foster contract doesn't have that, the fosters are going to care for them, and the expectation is as a foster-based organization, I'm going to take all 20 fosters back, guess what is not going to happen? Those animals are not going to get out of crisis, right? Okay, so make sure you know, again, brick and mortar, foster-based. It's just doing little check boxes and then following a tree to create something. And hazardous material and storage, I can't. This is that one thing. Okay, besides making your own plan, go back to your facility today, walk around, look at it with a different perspective. Look at it with your eyes and say, where are my hazardous materials? Where are my chemicals stored versus this? Where do I have my leashes and collars? Where do I have my carriers? Do I have dangerous equipment that is not tied down that is adjacent to where I do my animal care? Many municipal organizations that also care for hoof stock have a barn, they have run-in sheds or sheds where they do their manure and their sawdust, and right there in there is typically where is what I like to call the resource pile, right? How many of you guys have a resource pile at your shelter that's full of like busted wire crates that are completely, okay, yeah, see? I wasn't saying, this is the resource pile, right? And if we had a lot of ingenuity and we were artists, we would be going and doing something with that resource pile. Do you know what that resource pile is in a disaster event? An accident waiting to happen. Tie it down. Get rid of it. Have a volunteer cleanup day. But get rid of that resource pile. If you have unused equipment you are not using and it is sitting around, get rid of it. Because all the things you think aren't going to happen are going to happen. And then you'll learn after the fact, which is a great way to learn. But why, if you have the knowledge pre, would you put yourself in that position? Okay? What if the wire crate blows into a horse pasture, the horse is running from a high wind situation, steps right into that wire crate, busts its leg? It will happen. Horses are fine china. They look very sturdy, but they're very, very fragile. And they have a lot of opinions. And one of them in a disaster is, if I'm not prepared, don't mess with me. Okay? If they're not handled regularly, they're not going to be handled in a disaster. Okay. So we talked about predictable versus unpredictable events, and I put it into the buckets. How we normally think about 72 hours pre an event, 72 hours post an event. And this is attainable stuff. This is all here. You guys are already doing it. What I just need, just put it on paper. After you've created your personal plan, here's the things I know I can expect to happen. This is what I'm going to do in 72 hours pre the event. Here's the things I can't predict. Wildfires is a huge one. Here's what I'm going to do 72 hours post-event. I also encourage you to write the plan to be position-driven. Does anybody know what I mean when I say that? When you write your plans, what do I mean by position-driven? Just take a gander. And this is not like, I want to give you an award just because you're tolerating me, but what does position-driven mean?
Your staff position.
Okay, so I'm going to go over here. What does it mean?
Maybe not based on a specific person, but their position in the organization.
Did everybody hear that? Okay, so most disaster plans we see for facilities are like, call Connie. Her number's 301-225-9795. That's not really her number. Okay? 8675309. No? Am I dating myself generationally? Jenny, where do I run to? Don't do that. Okay? Because what we have seen is staff turnover. So you need to make it position-driven. My director of facilities is going to get the hazardous materials, remove them. This is 72 hours pre an event. I'm going to do a walkthrough with my director of operations. I'm going to call in my foster coordinator. My foster coordinator is going to check in with all my houses. Going to make sure that those people have a plan to take their foster animals with them because we can't take them back. Okay? I'm going to call my director of veterinary medicine. I'm going to ensure that any animal that is owned by the shelter is ready to be part of a share program. It has all its vaccinations or current requirements to be able to go in-state or interstate travel. So that's what I'm going to prioritize. So that if I have a resource share partner, I can get my animals out of my facility. Because if I get my animals out of my facility, I can be prepared to serve the community. Okay? So write it to be position-driven, not person-driven. The one thing I would note is on evacuation, partial versus complete. That was what I was talking about is are you planning for this entire event to remove all your animals, or are you looking at moving a portion of your population? And we see this a lot with power loss or fire in a facility where you have to shift. So I can get some of my animals out, but I'm going to have to care for these. If you're a municipal organization, you know the animals that can't go on a transfer or a share program are your court holds. Okay? You know your shelter population now. How much is the percentage of animals you can't send out? Your disaster plan needs to take that into account. If 60% of your pets are held for court cases, guess who's not leaving? Unless you have a really progressive community where they talk about being able to temporarily place some of those animals in legitimate other scenarios, whether it's a partnership with another community or trained foster homes. And I'm telling you, that is a unicorn who is farting glitter. It doesn't really exist. So you really need to think about it. If you're developing a plan and you're a foster-based group, you're looking at your agreements. Include a disaster clause or what the expectation of that foster volunteer is to come back if they need to bring the animal back to you to have it be in there. And then your supplies, make sure your fosters have a to-go kit for 3 to 5 days. This is a little bit dated. I would say anybody who's personally preparing is doing it for a longer period of time. We've seen things where you're not allowed back into your residences for up to 2 weeks in some of the highly damaged areas, maybe even longer. So just plan and then plan again. For your brick and mortar, limited admission, are you going to serve the community and how? Are you going to do it in partnership with the Red Cross by standing up a temporary shelter? Are you going to only take care of your own animals? And that's limited admission. You guys potentially have a choice. For your municipal organizations, guess who doesn't have a choice? You. So make sure you're prepared for it. And you want to have these 3 buckets. What are you doing with your shelter animals? Priority. That's like planning personal preparedness. That's taking care of home. Community animals, and then what's going to happen with their families in need. Okay, publish these plans, implement and train. I've talked about this a lot. The best laid plans don't work if nobody knows what they are. This is this slide in 1 sentence, okay? If you do not publish the plan and then practice the plan will not get executed in the way that you are hoping. If time allows, I strongly encourage mock exercises. And make it user functional. So adults learn in many different modalities. Like today, I am a talking head and you will retain some part of it. If you get the slides back, you're going to read. Do you know the best way you learn is to do? So do mock exercises. Write it, talk about it, do it. Then it will make it, it'll commit it to memory. The best way to learn is to teach. That's how you commit it to memory, okay? And again, we touched on this. I can't stress enough, and I hope Bryant can help us bridge the gap a little bit, even if I'm giving him homework. So sorry. You guys need to know who your emergency managers are. They're sitting at something called an EOC. When a disaster strikes, that's multi-jurisdictional within the state. Guess where all the decisions are happening? At the EOC. Guess who wants representation? You. Simply put. All right? And then think larger. Just a note of caution, oftentimes when you're working with emergency managers or facilitators in your community, the 2 buildings that they will identify as a shelter for animals or people with pets is normally a church or a school. It is a very, very common temporary shelter use because it satisfies all the components of being ADA and all of that jazz. Know you're going to be limited. The first 2 things that return to function after disaster for recovery and normalcy are the 2 things that they will provide to you, a school and a church. All right? Normally 10 to 14 days post-disaster, they want children back in school. They want to be able to go to their place of worship. So if you've set up a temporary shelter there, know that you may need another temporary shelter. What you are having typically in disaster now is individuals who can leave and have the means to, and then individuals who do not. And those individuals who do not will not have the means to get on their feet within 7 to 10 days if it's a catastrophic event. So this is where that foster intervention, all of those other programs are so incredibly important. They will be displaced for a long time, and there's a socioeconomic barrier to them getting back on their feet with their pet. Okay? Social media, just a really quick note, it's amazing and it's dangerous. Okay? You be proactive about your communication, use it as a tool for yourself. Most reunifications are happening organically on social media post an event. I saw this, how many of you guys have seen, I saw this dog on 23rd and F, it wouldn't let me come near him, get it if you can, didn't have a collar or tags. Try to use the power of that tool. Communicate out proactively what people need to know. There will be a shelter, it will be open, it will have staff. You can bring they will need to have, okay? Who, what, when, where, what. Make sure that messaging is going out, especially in a pre-event, that you can use social media to take that. Animals will be held at the fairgrounds. It will be open hours, staff 24 access. Large animals can only come between 10 and 2. They must have coggins, and please bring your own care supplies. Small animals will be held in this building. Also will be staffed XYZ. They will need this, okay? Where to go, who to call. You can also use it for requesting donations. We could also have a big conversation on this. Don't request things you do not have the capacity to manage. Because if you ask for it, it will come because your community has been impacted and the first thing they want to do is help the community. So if you want potatoes and you put out a call for potatoes and you get a whole potato truck, do you know what to do with it? Okay? Make sure you have some donation management or inventory management. The biggest disaster within a disaster for facilities who have been impacted is donation management. Open bags of food, blankets, crates, carriers, leashes, collars. Where do they go? What do they do? How are they used? Who's managing them? And information sharing. So again, be careful to not create a disaster within a disaster. Don't believe everything posted. It's a tool where people are going to be highly charged. They just encountered something. Make sure you do your due diligence. Don't feed into it. And avoid posting photos of animals in crisis for an all call to rescue. Because what you will get is people doing that. So as an animal welfare professional, the one way to take yourself out of the conversation with emergency management is to put something on social media that says, this animal is in crisis. Anybody who's here, go help. Because you know what you're going to do? You're going to clog the system that the emergency manager is looking at for the entire community and potentially put a person at risk to go into a disaster area. Don't do this. Because whatever bridge you have created will be broken immediately in a disaster if you do an all call. Okay? Have appropriate permissions to release photos, especially if they're owned animals. Post complete information. Don't abbreviate. Get it all there. If individuals are getting their information from there, they are going to take all that content in. To recap very succinctly, personal preparedness. What am I going to do if I stay? What am I going to do if I go? Facility preparedness. What type of facility do I need to be prepared for? Foster or shelter? What am I going to do if I stay? What am I going to do if I go? Today, I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call my friends in emergency management, in the sheltering community, in counties that are outside of my own, and I'm going to start talking. Bing, bam, boom, right? And I'd like to invite Bryant to come up here because he has very specific resources in the state, and also he smells delicious.
All right. So, again, my name is Bryant Taylor. I'm the Emergency Response and Preparedness Manager for Charleston Animal Society. I've met a few of you before, but I haven't met you before. Hello. I'm here to help with our disaster plan here at Charleston Animal Society, but I also am a resource here in the state to help other shelters across the state as well, because, again, like she was saying, we want to build those relationships, again, like Becca and Abby do with No Kill South Carolina, but if you guys are having an emergency or a disaster, I'm also here for you guys as well. So feel free to stop me. I'll give you my card, introduce you, whatever. So again, I'm just going to build off of a few things that Shada has said for us today. Like she said, her main thing was making sure that you have your individual plan, but also once you have your individual plan and your organizational plan, it's very important that you update your plan regularly. It shouldn't be something that you go through all this work, You make your plan, and then you never look at it again. You want to make sure that you're updating it on a routine basis because, again, there will be changes that your organization is going to go through. Let's say you start a new program. You build that foster program that we've talked about today, or you start an outreach program. How is that going to be affected in the event of emergency? What steps do you need to, it wasn't there when you built the plan, but you need to make sure that it's covered in your plan. That's one thing that's going to trigger you to update your plan again as well. Also, as your shelter grows, your facility grows and changes, if you add on to your existing facility, or if you acquire a new space, or if you get new equipment, if you get new vehicles or a new trailer or anything like that, how is that going to be covered under the plan? But also, what does it now allow you to do? Are you now able to help your community and the surrounding area more because you now have this increased capacity? So those are also going to be triggers to update that plan on a regular basis. Also, the more common one, staffing changes. As people's roles and positions changes, you also want to make sure that that is reflected in the plan as well. So that's going to be a reason to update that plan as well. And again, as Shada was saying, you want to make sure that you present the plan routinely to all stakeholders. So something that we do here at Charleston Animal Society, right around hurricane season, around June, I start during our all-staff meetings, just giving little tidbits of information about our emergency planning. One, emphasizing the importance that staff have their own plans because we want them to know that if they don't have a plan, they can't be here for Charleston Animal Society and the community. But we also just go through different portions of our plan in our all-staff meetings so that everybody is familiar with it. It's going to be beneficial for new staff that have joined the team that weren't there during the last disaster season, but it also is going to be a refresher for existing staff so that they keep that information current. So you're going to make sure that you want to present it to everybody, not just staff, but again, your volunteers, your foster families, your board, everybody like that, just making sure that anytime you gather regularly, you touch on the importance of disasters and things like that to reflect your plan so everybody's familiar. Another thing that we did is we surveyed our staff when we do these updates and when we're talking about our disaster planning. We asked them, what are you guys likely to do in the event of a hurricane or something like that? Is your family most likely to evacuate, or are you going to stay in the area? And we do that so that we can anticipate staffing levels. We don't want to be in the situation where there's a hurricane coming and all of our staff is evacuated. Then we're left in the lurch. So we surveyed all of our staff. We asked them to get like what their personal plan is, and just so that we are able to anticipate who will most likely be in the area for us. And we do the same thing with our volunteers and our foster families as well. We sent out a survey to all of our foster families. We asked them, are they able to stay in their current homes in the event of a hurricane or something like that, or if they were going to evacuate? And in either scenario, would they plan to take their foster animals with them, or would they need to bring them back to us? Because we don't want to be caught stuck in a situation like that. And thankfully, I believe about 95% of our foster families said that either way, they would keep their foster animals with them. We're still going to be prepared either way if they do end up bringing them to us, but we just wanted to get a heads up notice and time. And from that, we were also able to take our staff and come up with like a skeleton crew. When Shada was saying about having what you're going to do if you shelter in place or if you are to evacuate entirely, we were able to determine which staff is willing to stay here at the shelter for whatever animals, like she said, that can't be evacuated. We want to be able to identify ahead of time who is going to be part of that skeleton crew to stay here and take care of whatever animals or the facility that will be here. So we were able to do that with staff. And another thing that it led us to do with our volunteers, we were able to identify volunteers that were willing to help out in times of disaster. So we created a separate volunteer program for disaster emergency response volunteers who help us in times of disaster. So right now we have them involved with our transport program because we understand in an emergency situation, transport is going to be a big part of what we'll be doing. So we want to make sure that they're comfortable with how we transport animals. So they've driven for us, they've helped us prepare for types of transports and things like that. So they're learning little bits of things in the meantime, but we also know, like, hey, if there's a hurricane, we can call on these volunteers in addition to our skeleton crew, in addition to this percentage of staff that are existing here at Charleston Animal Society. And again, we want to make sure the importance of building relationships now. So again, if you haven't met you, I definitely want to meet you today. Again, Becca and Abby do a great job of talking with you all. So again, you can also use them to get to know everybody here in the room. But again, we want to make sure that we're talking building those relationships so that, hey, if you're having an emergency, I know who to call, and I know how we can help each other, what resources we all can share together. So, and again, that can be start off as an informal conversation, but then you can move to things like MOUs and things like that with formalizing the agreement between the organizations. And you want to do that with organizations here in South Carolina, outside organizations in our region, and national organizations like ASPCA, HSUS, Greater Good. Those are things you want to start doing now before a disaster happens. Also, training opportunities. That's another thing you want to look into. There are lots of opportunities that you can do. Either I would start off with like the FEMA trainings for incident command systems, especially as Shada was saying, you want to get involved with the county emergency management. Those trainings are going to be very beneficial to you so that you can work into their system because that's how they operate. So FEMA trainings definitely highly recommended. There are also emergency sheltering trainings offered by organizations like Code 3. So you want to make sure you're acquiring as much knowledge and information in before a disaster happens. So there are lots of kind of opportunities that I can share with all of you guys about how you can prepare yourself for any type of emergency. And again, there are some helpful links here in the state. That's South Carolina Emergency Management. If you go to that website, I think on the Who We Are tab, there's a link to every county emergency management. So that's how you can find out who your emergency management people are. One of the great things that I did when I started here at Charleston Animal Society, Charleston County Emergency Management, they do an annual exercise where they do a mock exercise for the county on various things. Usually it's a hurricane. But I was able to sit in with them during their mock exercise, and it's a great tool to meet all the major players in your county and make those connections. So I would start off there, go in there, figure out who that is, ask if you can sit on an exercise. They also offer helping you build your emergency plan yourself, so you don't have to do it alone. So that's a good thing to make those contacts now. They also, one of the things that we're going to do here in Charleston Animal Society soon, you can do a tabletop exercise with them. So it's a good thing to meet them and figure out what they offer and how they can help you build your plan so you don't have to do it alone. And I think that's going to be about it. Does anybody else have any other questions? At this link, the training.fema.gov, incident command systems, I think it's ISS, start with 100, 200, 300, 400, and I think 700 are like the essential beginning courses that you're going to take. But they also offer a range of other ones, and those are online courses. You can do it at any computer, it takes a few hours to do. If you also get involved with your local emergency management, they do offer these trainings in person too. So you can, that's another way you can get involved and do that. And they offer a broader range of trainings on the local level as well. Yeah. Any other questions? I know we're running a little short on time, so I just wanted to get through this really quickly. But again, feel free to say hi. I'd love to meet you all. I'll give you my card, and I'd love to know how I can help you before a disaster. Or I hope you don't have a disaster, but I'm here if you are here.